This episode contains mature themes and discussions that may not be suitable for all audiences. We believe in open and honest conversations, which sometimes means exploring topics that can be sensitive or challenging. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Shantell Martin, and I'm the host of What's the Point? This is a conversation series dedicated to exploring why artists create art and the forces that influence us. Join me as I sit down with artists and friends to talk about their reasons for doing what they do and why they continue to create. It's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Robert Russell. Originally from Kansas City, Robert is a conceptual fine artist known for his acrylic interpretations of photographic images that reflect on nature, memory, and iconography. Whether creating soft and vulnerable interpretations of not so soft and not so vulnerable subjects or painting large-scale porcelain objects on canvas to take away the preciousness of the material, this juxtaposition is often present in his work. Please welcome Robert Russell. Well, welcome, Robert. It's so nice to have you here.
It's nice to be here.
We've got a microphone in front of our face, but you can kind of adjust it if you like. And
yeah, I want to see your eyeballs.
Yeah.
So we'll come over here.
We'll do that.
Oh, there we go. Okay, that's
perfect.
Better.
Nice.
Okay.
Well, this series is called What's the Point? And as an artist, I often have these existential crises every so often where I'm like, why am I doing this? Like,
how infrequent.
How infrequent, I know. And I'm lucky it's only every few years. Otherwise, I probably would have quit being an artist by now if it was more frequent. And I've always found that when I talk to other artists about how they got there or why they do it and, what pushes them or what hurdles they've had, that always kind of gives me some sense of, okay, I'm in the right place. I'm meant to be doing what I'm doing. And I think, artists can be mirrors to each other.
For sure.
And inspiration to each other. And so with that, I'd love to learn about you and your incredible work and the journey that you've been on. And I'll start with a question just by asking, what was your first introduction to art?
Okay. Thank you for having me. And I love what you just said because I do, and I'll get to your question, but I do feel that so much of being an artist is just sort of navigating an existential crisis ongoing.
Yeah.
It's especially, it's I don't want to say it's easy, but it's a lot easier to work when a lot of the spotlights are on you and everybody's thrilled to see what you're doing and waiting for your next thing. It's a lot harder to work when kind of feels like nobody's there, nobody cares. I have found over the years that plugging in with my colleagues has been a great way to just sort of keep the fire going. And so that community is absolutely crucial. So I love that you're doing this.
Because it is interesting. Being an artist is self-inflicted.
Yeah, totally.
We do this to ourselves.
Totally. I know. I don't wish this on anybody. I have two kids who are teenagers and people ask me, are either of them artists? And I say, thank God, no, I don't wish that on anyone. It is an affliction. I think you're right.
No, people often ask me, how do I be an artist? What advice do you have? And I'm like, don't do it. Do something else. And I'm like, that sounds harsh, but only do this if there is no other path and you feel like you can't.
Absolutely. Which is a great segue. So to answer your question, which is how did I get into it? There was really nothing else I was going to do. It was all I did. And it's really my earliest memories are just scribbling stuff, drawing stuff, and I just kept doing that. And I can remember sitting on the floor drawing for so many hours that my legs had completely gone numb, and you
can't stand up.
I couldn't even stand up. And so it was a way to kind of create a world. I think there was some certain amount of escape going on for sure. And I think I still use it that way. I think I intuitively understood that there was something almost meditative about it. It was a kind of a meditation practice before I knew I needed one. So I would say that there was a kind of an intuitive understanding that I needed to be making something and creating an alternate universe in my work that I could sort of inhabit for a while.
So you're a little kid drawing.
Yeah.
Your legs are going numb.
Right.
What kind of environment are you in? You have siblings? What's going on?
I had a younger
you?
sibling. I was. My folks split when I was very young. I was mostly with my mom, and she worked, and so I was kind of on my own a lot. And thank God we didn't have these damn phones that we have now. So there was. I had to kind of invent and I lived in this wasteland of the West Valley. No offense to people from the West Valley, but in the 1970s when I grew up, it was a wasteland.
So for us that don't really know what West Valley is.
Okay, so it's 1970s tract housing developments come in. Prior to that, it was kind of desert and farmland, a lot of citrus farms. And so, in the 70s, you have these developers who would just sort of blacktop a section and throw up a bunch of houses, all of which were the same, 4 or 5 different models. Very, very
cookie cutter.
Very cookie cutter, very, working class, and far away from everything. And so it was, the environment was kind of isolating. There, I didn't have access to great museums or, a lot of great cultural production. I had my own world. I had my skateboard and, my bikes and my drawing utensils. And so that was sort of the environment. I mean, it was interesting because you'd have this cookie cutter neighborhood and then tumbleweeds would roll through.
Like the Wild West, yeah.
It was like the Wild West.
It's interesting when they build these developments, and especially at that time and in that sort of place, there's no public transport. Like as a kid, you can't, I'm going to jump on a bus and go see some friends or go get cultured or go do something. You know, you're there. You're
there. You could not go anywhere. Yeah, so I was trapped. And certainly before I had a car, you're really isolated. So I lived on my bike. My stepdad had a, very early adopter to the VHS camera.
Okay, love that.
So I made a lot of movies with my friends. I brought everybody in to, help me make these movies, usually about shooting people.
Yeah.
For the most part. And just made stuff. And, and kind of was a bit of a hooligan, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yeah. So by high school, I kind of got up to a lot of no good, as did my friends. Still drawing. Mm-hmm. Now sometimes drawing on walls.
Yeah.
And but I think painting and drawing for me were, while they were on the one hand meditative, they were also it was also kind of an act of aggression, or even a kind of an assault or an announcement, a proclamation, like here I am, So it operated on a bunch of different levels, but it was certainly not something I ever thought somebody could do as a career.
Yeah. I can totally relate to that as a kind of a young kid growing up in central London. I had this kind of, and maybe this is different for you, but I had this like anger for London because I had no control in that city.
Right.
And, it wasn't really clear what my path would be or could be. And so I think I took that aggression out on walls. Mm-hmm. And, you're kind of making a mark in a place that hasn't made room or a mark for you yet. Mm-hmm. And when I moved to Japan, like years later, I like kind of lost that anger in a sense. I'm like, Tokyo didn't do anything to me. and I stopped putting art up on walls at that point and kind of went more into notebooks and paper.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, just getting it out.
Getting it out, yeah.
And so, you're growing up in like West Valley and very cookie cutter, not a lot of access to the outside world.
Right.
Are you walking to school, taking the bus to school, riding to school?
My mom would take me when I was young. Early on I would walk. My grade school and even middle school were walking distance, so I would walk. And then when I got to high school, before I drove, my mom drove me, and then I got a car, and then I drove myself.
So you got a car pretty young then?
Yeah, I mean, kids in the valley, for sure.
Yeah.
We all had cars. These are not, they were real bangers, these things. And
it got you from A to B.
Yeah, and I went through a bunch of those cars.
Yeah.
And, we played on those cars, worked on those cars, tried to drag each other on our skateboards from those cars. It was just another dangerous extension for the skateboard.
Yeah. Does any of that VHS tape exist? Is that around?
I think some of it. Yeah. I think my mom and my stepdad have some of it.
Yeah.
I think it would probably be really terrifying to look at. But I bet there's some fun stuff in there too.
Because it's funny, people who are born like before the 80s, I'm always surprised when, there's some memoir or some feature on them and they find all this archival footage from some tape. And I'm always like, who's
doing that?
Who had that then,
Thank God there were always those folks out there.
Yeah.
I mean, and, I and my stepdad were those folks that just had this big hulking object that you had to carry around all these big heavy batteries and everything. But thank God for some of that stuff.
Like sometimes there's a big cable behind you or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about the earlier drawing? Is any of that around?
I think there might be a few odds and ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, the earliest stuff is really pretty nasty and aggressive.
Yeah.
And a lot of anger.
In a cliche way?
Yeah, a lot of violence.
Like violence,
pretty cliched
and
violence. Yeah. Lots of exploding humans and stabbings and things like that. Things that nowadays would probably terrify most teachers and get you.
But isn't that amazing? Like to get where you are now, you had to go through that.
I had to do that
and extract that and get that stuff out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of like the dark path that leads you to teacups.
For sure. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yes. Now, I mean, that's a funny point. I love that you draw that long arc. Yes.
I love that. And then, so tell me, you're going to high school, it sounds like you've been drawing your whole life and unlike a lot of people, you didn't stop, you kept drawing.
I kept going, didn't stop. There was no question that was something that I did, but it wasn't something that I knew you could do in a way because I didn't really have any examples of that around me.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was a kid, in high school, they had these aptitude tests where they would sort of survey you, a long list of, questions. They'd hand you a long list of questions, you'd answer them, and then they would determine what your aptitude was, and they would decide what career you should do. And, mine came up that I should be an artist. And I remember my teacher at the time said, well, you need to find something to do because you can't do that.
You can't do we've done this test to figure out what you should do, but you can't do the thing that you've tested for. Okay.
Right, so find something.
Yeah. So obviously not a lot of support there.
Not a lot of support there.
Yeah.
I did have a nice drawing teacher in high school, but really what happened, there were a few amazing moments that got me serious and got me to grow up a bit and just take my practice seriously and myself seriously for that matter. And that was when I was, so as I said, I was a kind of a real hooligan in high school. My father said, you have a cousin at Arizona State University, which is the number one, probably still is the number one party school in America. And he said, if you can write your name on a piece of paper, they'll accept you.
Oh.
And he said, so I've done that. You're going there. And so I went there. And it was really not the right place for me at all. But I fell in love with a girl who was an artist. And so we drew together and made stuff together. And then I had a drawing class, a figure drawing class. And the professor was just completely enamored with my drawings. And he said, you really should be somewhere else. You really should go to RISD.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, my girlfriend at the time said, we should go to RISD. So suddenly RISD's on our radar. It had not been on mine, not something I'd ever heard of. And so we got the applications. We took slides of our drawings, submitted them. I got in. She did it.
I knew that was coming. I knew it. I knew it was coming.
I know. It's a sad story. But anyway, I got there. And then when I got there, everything shifted. Absolutely everything shifted.
So you still went?
I went. Oh, yeah. I went. Yeah. She went to the Art Institute of Boston, which doesn't exist anymore. We continued a long-distance relationship for a little while, and then it fizzled out. But RISD was a momentous shift for me because suddenly I was around my people who made things, and people who wanted to talk about making things. And that was all I wanted to do.
And I think they have a beautiful campus there as well.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And growing up, as I said, where I did, to go from there to Providence, Rhode Island in the 90s was an absolute culture shock in the best way imaginable. Mm-hmm. And the school itself had a great museum. I could go up and, see all these incredible works. And I was so close to New York City. And so suddenly, the whole world opened up.
And I love that there was the Arizona kind of pit stop in the middle, which probably really made you, be thankful for that opportunity there as well.
For sure.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I've been to RISD. I've spoke there kind of years ago, but I've never really, I think I know they have a really good furniture department,
Mm-hmm.
but outside of that, I'm not that familiar with kind of their art department and what they specialize in, or kind of what their teaching philosophy is. Like, what was that about?
Well, I came in as what we call the transfer student. So I
Yeah.
missed their foundation program, which they throw everybody. So RISD is really a whole bunch of different schools. The architecture, the ID, the jewelry, light metals, all those, they're all very disparate environments, and you don't really overlap much except for freshman year, which I didn't get to have. And that's when they throw you into what they called the foundation program, and everybody does these basic design courses together, which I think would have been incredible.
Yeah.
Whatever, I don't begrudge anything. A few things, but certainly not about RISD. But so I missed that. So I just plunged directly into the painting program, and I had some great professors there. And again, I had, there were a bunch of people making things, and I could sit around and talk with them all day and night, and look at their stuff, and it was it was a great experience. And then people would come over and want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So it was really fantastic. So that was the experience for me.
And then, like coming from where you did, what was that like suddenly being with this like cross section of people from all over the country and, kind of the world? Like, what was that like?
I mean, it was just like, every capillary in my body, just like everything activated. Suddenly.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a whole other world that I didn't know existed. I mean, I had a hunch.
Yeah.
But I didn't have internet.
Yeah. Because I remember doing my foundation course in England, and I did mine in like 1999, and that changed my life because where I came from, if you were different, you got beaten up, or, no one would speak to you.
Right.
And then suddenly I went to art school and everyone was different. And we could celebrate each other.
Exactly.
And, I was like, wait, you're going to get beaten up. You've got pink hair. You're going to get beaten up. You're gay. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is not safe. Right. And it took me a little while to adjust to realize that art school was safe. Like, it was a safe place to be yourself.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was absolutely that experience for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that. And so you start painting there. What are your subjects? Do they dictate what you should do?
They were, this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But there were certain types of assignments, but my strongest memories of the stuff that I made was just I was doing a lot of observational drawing and painting. I was looking at people. I was sitting in parks. I was sketching people, coming back to the studio and making paintings based on that, painting my friends, just trying to get familiar with material, trying to paint, because for me, suddenly making painting was a new thing. I hadn't really painted anything prior to that. So, and that, painting was what I thought real artists did.
Yeah.
Drawing was what you do to practice. So I didn't recognize drawing as its own practice. Now I view them as two very distinct parts of my practice, obviously. And there's very little overlap in the way that they operate, because it's a whole different type of an experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of observational type of work.
Yeah, I draw, and people are always like, oh, so when are you going to start painting? And you're like, drawing is not a path to painting always.
Right.
It's like you say, they're very separate practices.
Totally.
So for people that aren't familiar with your work, how would you describe kind of the philosophy of your work, or like the visual of your work?
I guess what I say is that, I'm really drawn to, first of all, I'm drawn to really conventional subject matter, because I like to I have a limited palette that I work in when I'm painting.
What does that mean, conventional?
Well, I would say subject matter that has a kind of a history that's familiar. So still life, portraiture, landscape, even history painting. So, and because I'm painting, like capital P painting, I feel like, confining the practice to that sort of a structure is useful for me. I'm not good with too many options. I don't like a menu with a lot of things on it. I'm a vegan, and it's very easy because I just know exactly what I can eat. Anything that doesn't have the animals, I'll eat it. So I like a limited palette, and I use a very limited palette. I use essentially 4 or 5 colors. And so therefore the subjects tend to be, so you have these, these art historical conventions, which I'm kind of operating within, and then the subjects tend to be subjects that I find to be both hyper familiar and I try to kind of derealize them in a way, I guess. I love sentimentality, and I am very sentimental. I like when work, kitsch is a funny word, but I like when the work is just sort of borderline falling into kitsch, when it's just at any moment, it gets so saccharine. And I like to kind of rescue things from that pit, from that, ledge.
Like the cliff right there.
Yeah. Because at any moment, these things can get so sappy and melodramatic. And I'm not interested in that, but I do like that fine line where it starts to fall. And I think I use painting as a kind of as a sort of a rigor that ultimately does rescue these objects. So like the teacups, for example, it's a very, first of all, what we call, it's a very terrible term, but you've heard the term the Sunday painter, the sort of hobbyist
I haven't
painter.
heard that.
It's sort of like the hobbyist painter,
Okay.
And so this, the teacups are sort of a Sunday painter subject. They're pretty, it's historical. You think about Granny and things like that. But I've sort of tried to apply such an attention to the detail and certainly scaled them up massively and given them importance and kind of rescued them from that, from that realm.
Yeah.
And because they really are beautiful, and sometimes really beautiful things, certainly they can be kitschy, but sometimes it's just beautiful. Carnations are really pretty.
I love that you're like the savior of the kitsch, and you kind of repackage it in this like limited palette, but in a very contemporary, conventional way that allows us to really see the object.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. And then now we're going to go home, and if we have a grandma teacup, we're going to be like, I see you, but you need to be presented in a different way.
Right. I mean, with these things, we can become, these ubiquitous objects can become so familiar that we don't see them.
Yeah.
And so they become really archetypal, and they don't function anymore.
Yeah.
They just sort of disappear.
And how did you come to your color palette? You said you're using very limited colors, maybe 5.
Well, so what happened was then I went to Cal Arts. There was a break between RISD and Cal Arts. So I went to Cal Arts, and at that point I was one of just a couple of painters in the graduate program. And I worked with people who are now my wonderful friends like Tom Lawson and Charles Gaines. And I wanted to kind of situate my practice with. I saw the context for my work as Cal Arts, which it was. I mean, there's the work. So that was the space I was operating in. So the work was I was kind of asserting painting within this group of people, which included my faculty and my colleagues there. And it wasn't I don't want to say it was unfriendly to painting, but it certainly wasn't. I joke that, Michael Asher didn't come and teach me how to mix colors in my studio, So I wanted to make these really assertive paintings and really excessive and decadent paintings, because that to me was sort of what painting was. It was excessive. It was decadent. It had a complicated history that nobody really wanted to deal with. The conceptual artists among my peer group there, there was a lot of kind of monochromatic works.
Yeah.
So I started work. And I just read that article called Chromophobia, whose author I can't remember. But so I wanted to do something that was sort of like we were just talking about, kind of unserious, kind of kitsch. So I decided to make a group of pink paintings using just alizarin, crimson, and white, which alizarin is a real bodily color. It's really like blood when you squeeze it out of the tube. And you mix it with white, and it becomes very fleshy, like the inside of the body, And so it felt very kind of guttural and visceral, like think of like Soutine's paintings, for example. And then I painted pigs in pens, which I found to be, factory farming, I find to be the most excessive and decadent, disgusting thing that we do as human species. So I thought, I'll make these massive paintings of pigs, which are kind of obliquely about ourselves, because first of all, pigs are very similar to human beings in our DNA, our physicality. Tattoo artists practice on pigs, sadly. So it was a way to kind of do this. So anyway, this is a long answer to your question of how the color palette. So that was a show that I did for my first year in the grad program at Cal Arts, made exclusive with pink. The show was called Pink. And then I was in this almost modernist way. I was doing a sort of an essentialist exercise where I was like, okay, I got pink. Now I'm going to add something else.
Yeah.
And so I reduced everything down, and then I just brought in only what was necessary. And I found that when I limited the palette range, there was a real wealth of opportunity within there.
Yeah.
And I haven't really added many more colors because I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, because you got that strong foundation, and then you don't really need much on top of that.
I don't need much. And, I don't like to, I like to be, I feel like I can see more when I have fewer options available.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned, kind of the faculty or the inspirations or the people that were around you at Cal Arts. Like, what was that like, kind of, having them as peers and, kind of tutors?
It was, well, certainly I had a fantastic relationship with the faculty, and it was really helpful. That many conversations I had were so helpful to just kind of kept throwing doors open, turning lights on, and planting little seeds in my brain that kind of germinated through the experience and then have later kind of come out. I came into Cal Arts having, being very familiar with Tom Lawson's writings in the 80s on painting, like Last Exit Art and things like that.
I'm not familiar with Tom.
Okay, so he's a painter.
Okay, thank you.
And he was the chair of the art department for, I don't want to get it wrong, but a long ass time. I think that's an accurate characterization.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, he made these wonderful paintings, and some that I remember really well were, kids with black eyes and things like that. So, he too, the work sort of situated within kitsch. And then there was kind of linguistic jokes in there, like that painting I think was called Please Don't Hit Me Again or Don't Hit Her Again.
Huh.
So it's, it's aggressive, but then he had this approach which was almost clumsy in a way.
Yeah.
But they're really elegant pictures. And anyway, so, he was somebody I knew I wanted to work with as a painter. Charles kind of appointed me as his TA for the second year, which is what they do. The faculty sort of pick from the student body. And that was a great experience because then I got to dig into all that thrilling post-colonial period.
Yeah. There's lots of it.
There's lots of it. And so that was a great experience. And, and my peers, it was sort of all over the map. I mean, it was really, everything goes there. I mean, this is 2005, 6. So everybody was just working every which way. Kari Upson was there at the time. Truly Hall was there. My year as well. My friend Carter Mall. You had a real array of practices going on.
You're in great company.
Yeah.
I went for a tour of Cal Arts recently, and I didn't realize how big it is compared to like the number of students that are there.
Right.
No, I went to St. Martin's in London where, they squeeze in as many as they can.
Sure.
And
well, it's Europe.
every hallway is packed. And then I went to Cal Arts and I'm like, where is everyone? And they're like, well, the students kind of trickle in and out, but there's only, I think, 1,300 students in the whole school.
Right.
In this massive campus kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Right. Right. So a lot of land.
But that makes for a great opportunity of being a student there and really getting lost and not having that kind of temptation of like going down Broadway or, going shopping or doing something else. Like you're there.
Yeah, you're there in the studio. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
That's
and
amazing.
then your community are all there too. So it's all right there.
Yeah.
I mean,
and so you have a show coming up soon.
Yes, I have a show coming up in New York in July at Miles McHenry, and it's more teacups. It's a kind of a reiteration of the teacup idea.
Nice. Have you worked with them before?
Yeah, this will be my second show with him. I did a teacup show in the midst of COVID with him. Those teacups were probably ones you've seen online, which were those really archetypal ones where they're just sort of centered in a black ground. These have now sort of thrown up in the air, so they're against bright blue backgrounds, which sort of suggests the sky.
Oh, yeah.
And I think of them as falling.
Nice. Yeah. But if they're falling, they might break.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's this, that it's the last moment that you'll capture this beauty.
Yeah. And then I think there's something there about the fragility of life and, the cycle of these sentimental objects and what sentimentality actually is. You know, it's something that will be lost at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
And is there a kind of a conscious like bringing that in there? This idea
For
of
sure. Yeah.
like
I mean, I
life
found
and
these.
death.
I got to the teacups initially because this was just before COVID pandemic. I was going through eBay to find pictures where the human body infiltrated photographs where objects were being sold. And so very often jewelry, things like that. Somebody would have part of their arm or their finger, or if there was clothing, you would have part of the neck or the waist or whatever. And so I was gathering all these images thinking that it was going to be a series. It might still yet, but so I was collecting all these things. But one thing that kept coming up were these teacups. Kept finding these teacups, so I developed a whole theory about why people were posting teacups on eBay to sell them. And they were the really crude, simple photographs. And those are the photographs that I worked from. I loved that kind of unself-conscious images that people were making. So I developed a theory that because, you know, the effort involved is you have to post it, you have to respond to emails, then pack it and ship it.
Yeah.
And you make $5, $10 on these things. I couldn't understand why anybody would do this. So I decided that what they were doing was a kind of a ritual offering. And they were trying to find people out in the world that maybe wanted Granny's old teacups that maybe you didn't want to store, didn't want to have. And so it was a way to kind of find people out in the world that wanted it and having this kind of ritualistic exchange. And so then I took that thought and just turned the volume all the way up and did these massive paintings of these little tiny low-res iPhone pictures of Granny's teacups that literally sometimes you see the wrapper right next to it. You know, they literally just poured it out, pulled it out, shot it, put it back. And so that moment, so capturing that moment. And then this version is a kind of, it's a bit more narrative because now they've sort of been thrown up in the air.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that.
And like you said, they will ultimately shatter. So this is their last moment.
With eBay, did you buy any of those teacups?
I didn't buy them.
No.
Initially, I thought to buy them and set them up, but then I was afraid that I would start making really precious still lives out of these things, and I didn't want that. I wanted the interaction. I wanted to use their pictures as they were.
Yeah.
And you know, when I was a kid in the 70s, going back, I had stucco ceiling in my bedroom, and at night when I would lay in bed, couldn't fall asleep, I would basically draw pictures in the stucco because it was an infinite, you know, kind of landscape up there. And then a lot of times, just before I would fall asleep, I would find one little piece of stucco, and train my focus on it because I knew the moment I blinked, I'd never find it again because it was such an infinitesimal little speck. And so I view these kind of in that context.
I feel like I had a similar experience, but with wood chip wallpaper.
Oh, yeah?
That's very much there. So in your life, what are you sentimental about?
What am I sentimental about? Oh, my God. Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Everything makes me cry.
You collect everything? Don't throw things away? Or
I do hold on to, I hold on to everything. Yeah. I photograph everything before I had iPhone, I had a camera.
Yeah.
I photograph lots of things. I print those photos. I print piles and piles of photos. I get my inbox is filled with offers from various photo places offering me, 1,000 free prints, and I take them up on them every time.
Oh, wow.
So I just print everything.
Yeah.
So I have piles of photo albums. I do hold on to things. When I was a kid, I used to save dead batteries. And I remember I had a show and tell. I was a little kid. And my best friend is a kid named Jaroslo. And I brought in my dead batteries. I was so excited.
Look at my collection.
Look at my collection of dead batteries. And I remember Jaroslo in the front row with his legs crossed looks at me and says, "Man, that's dumb." So I think "Man, That's Dumb" is probably maybe going to be a title for some show soon.
And you said you cry at everything?
Oh, yeah. I cry all kinds of shit. Songs, something grabs me. Yes, I'm sentimental about it a lot.
I love that with the dead batteries. I used to collect plastic bags, just like shopping bags.
Right.
And at some point, my mum's like, well, do you really need all of those? And I would, flatten them.
Amazing.
And years later, I went back home. I had them in my mum's cupboard, and I went back, and I'm like, you can't find these anymore.
That's amazing.
These stores don't exist, or these bags don't exist anymore.
That's great. And so you still have them. She still has them.
They're there. I have to go back and, kind of clear out my mum's closet because
Yeah.
stuff's still there. I've
Right.
got like old Nintendos. I got my stamp collection, my coin collection. I used to collect everything as
Right.
well. But I think there's something about, these objects that they've come across your path. And there's something like nice about that kind of introduction or that meeting. And I think as a kid, I wanted to hold on to that.
Absolutely.
Didn't want to let go of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very connected with objects. I think they literally physically hold meaning.
Yeah.
I grew up Jewish. I mean, I wasn't really raised Jewish. I was a secular Jew, but I was bar mitzvahed, which was typical of my generation. And later, after having kids, we've sort of started to implement, my wife and I, some more ritual into our lives, one of which is Shabbat, which we just absolutely love because it's just a time to stop and acknowledge and look back and look, and just slow down and turn everything off. So we've been doing this since they were a kid. And my favorite prayer is the prayer over the bread, because I don't know if you've seen a challah before. Yeah, so it's braided. It's very handmade. And the prayer is often translated as "Thank you, God, for this bread," but really the translation is "Thank you, really, for the ability to make this bread." Because here you take all this natural stuff of the earth, and then you make something out of it. And you make this beautifully, obviously handmade thing with intention that gives you sustenance. So it's a kind of a commingling.
Yeah.
It's objectness and whatever you want to call it, God, the divine, spiritual, whatever, cosmic order, whatever your term for whatever that is, mixed with the hands, mixed with us, our objects, our bodies.
And so, speaking of objects, have you ever thought of making products or objects? So, for example, a Robert Russell photo album.
It's a good idea.
Because then you can have your own, and I'm sure people would love to, it encourages people to pull out their photos.
Right.
And kind of, in a way, that's a collaboration between your work and their work. And
I love that idea. I think we should talk about that more.
Okay.
I like that.
I love products because I think, I didn't grow up with art around me kind of, like yourself. And so, your sneakers on your feet or what you're wearing or the postcard on your fridge, like sometimes those are museums. Those are kind of art that
For sure.
Those are designs that we have interactions with. And so product is kind of a less intimidating kind of way of bringing people into art and saying like, these are paintings and drawings that you can have permission to view and see, which we don't really understand all the time because of the facade around the art world. But with products, you give that invitation.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Okay. I'll help you figure that out.
Okay, let's figure that out.
Let's make some. Okay,
yeah, I mean,
nice.
I think with the batteries, when I think about it now, first of all, I've always been attracted to metal and shiny stuff. I love shine. I mean, clearly, all the paintings I'm making now have a lot of shine in them. But the batteries, they look no different from when you bought them. They just didn't do whatever they did anymore, but they were still heavy and metal, and they occupied space, and they had all that shininess, and they were just amazing.
Recently, I had a bag of dead batteries, but somehow like a coin got in there, and then they all started to corrode. And I don't know if it was because of the coin and some chemical reaction or something.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, this doesn't look good.
You're right. No, then you got to get rid of that.
Yeah. Like, what do you do with this? So what I wanted to ask you is, do you inventory all of your art, your past art, obviously now because it's in, museums, galleries, you are, but kind of historically, have you been documenting your work?
I have, again, crazy documentarian here. I do have, I don't want to bore you, but I've subscribed to a database.
Bore
you? Okay, so I had subscribed to a database.
Okay.
Specifically for artists, and then I hired someone to help me sort of organize everything, find where everything was, get it all documented. It was this massive Herculean effort, which is one of these things which is just sort of always hanging in my subconscious I needed to do. Did it, then that company went away.
Oh, no way.
So I needed to migrate everything over, and then it became that overwhelming task all over again. So I do have a kind of a crude version of what I had done there, but I also have just an extremely crude version of folders in the cloud of really organized by year, the work organized by year. A lot of works I don't know exactly where they are, But most of it, I have a sense of where it is.
Yeah. That's interesting because I use a cloud-based inventory system and often we're like, can we get a backup of all of this? And they're like, well, we don't really do that, but we have our own backups. And
Right.
you kind of know at some point, the plug is going to get pulled and years of work is, potentially lost there.
Yeah, I know. That is my fear. I think this is the impulse to print all these photos, even the ones off my iPhone.
Yeah. And what are some we were talking about hurdles earlier, but what are some hurdles you faced on this journey as an artist?
As an artist, it's really just, there's two. There's the practical part of just maintaining a studio practice and income, so that's challenging. And, when I was younger, I found other ways to make income. I did a lot of storyboard art and design and things like that to make money. And that was really helpful. And then, so whatever, making an income, sustaining the practice, all that's a hurdle, that's a challenge. And then, the hardest parts are when, like I said at the beginning, when things kind of go quiet, when there seems to be a lack of interest in whatever it is that you're up to. That's when it's the hardest. Somebody told me, an older artist years ago, said, it's some of it's just a kind of a game of attrition. Eventually, folks fall away and stop doing it.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately just who's still standing. And again, I don't. There are no other options. My wife says, my wife's a performer, as I know your partner is. She said she literally there was no other option. That was all she was going to do. And I've heard her say to other struggling younger actors, if there's a plan B, then this is not your plan.
Yeah.
Because it takes everything you got.
Yeah.
And it takes
it will take it.
It will take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It will take it. So the hurdle is to just get back in the studio when it's the hardest.
Yeah.
When you're in the flow and the rhythm, just before a show and everything's cranking, that's easy when you just like to get in there and make more stuff. But like right now, I'm in the postpartum of a show. You're probably familiar with this. It's like the show just shipped. And now it's like, okay, now what the fuck? Yeah. And everybody's like, what are you up to now?
Yeah. And I love saying nothing.
Nothing.
And
fallow.
It's you see the look on people's face. They're very confused when you say you're doing nothing. And I say, it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do nothing. And it's so important that we do nothing.
Totally.
As creatives, we're on that wave where we're creating, and that wave is not sustainable.
Absolutely.
It needs to come down to the point where we do nothing at some point.
Totally. Got to fallow the fields.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting, I think, also being an artist, as you become more successful within your career, I think what people don't realize is that means the amount that you have to spend on your practice also goes up. Because now you might need a bigger space, so that's more rent. You've got insurance, you've got staff, you've got inventory.
Wait a minute, do I need to get insurance? I'm just kidding.
Well, also and then you have an insurance company was like, well, we can only insure the materials of your studio, not the actual artwork. And you're like, well, how does that work? Because this work now has value. And so, there's all these complications, lawyers, this, that.
Right.
And then every nonprofit was like, can you donate some work? Because now you're successful. So we don't want to pay you. We just need you to donate it. And you're like, but I have all this overhead. So it's like, it is just this balancing act of how to keep everything moving, but also have enough finances so you can have the freedom just to invent and experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. It is nice to have freedom.
Yeah.
It is really nice to have freedom, and the income certainly helps with that. Yeah. And, I wish we had a guild or a union or something that covered our insurance, our health insurance, whatever. That would be fantastic. Universal basic income, perhaps. Yes. I don't know.
There you go. So if you have total freedom, what are you making?
I like to think nothing different than what I'm making right now. I think... I guess if I had total freedom, I would work much more slowly.
Yeah.
I do like slowing down. I do like the luxury of time. For this body of work that I just shipped off, I tried to get all the paintings to a certain state early on. So I worked kind of frantically, kind of backbreakingly. And then once I got them to that state, I was able to kind of sit with them for a while in the studio, which was kind of a luxury.
Yeah.
But I wanted that time because I wanted to... for the last several exhibitions, I make all the work, and then, then wet paintings get shadow boxed and leave the studio, and then they dry on the gallery walls. But it was nice to have them kind of sit and settle in the studio and have some time with them and return to them and notice things, as opposed to noticing things after they're already hung.
Yeah.
But by the way, I just got, through a strange confluence of events, I got a few older works back in the studio. And of course, don't tell anybody, but I went back to work on them a little bit.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
You couldn't help yourself?
I can't help myself because I'm also a different painter now than I was, 6 years ago.
But so think about that. When you painted them, you were a different painter. You were a different person.
Totally.
And, art has that power of reflection where you can look back at your past self.
Yeah.
But you look back and you're like,
I'm going to fix it.
I can fix you.
I can fix this. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's recent past. I don't know that I would pull a painting out from 20 years ago and go back to work on it. But a painting that feels like fresher within the practice, where certainly, one of them was a teacup.
Yeah.
Although, don't worry, I didn't touch that.
Okay.
Those who... But one of them was from my catalog exhibition that I did with a knot, I think in 2018 maybe or something. So it still felt fresh. The ideas felt fresh. I don't know if you have this experience, but I can look back at old works and see parts of the picture and know like what I was listening to.
Wow.
They're real fossils of, it's a strange kind of somatic connection you have with these things. They're familiar. I can look at brushstrokes and remember the feeling of making it. I mean, it's a really strange, I don't have this experience with anything else, but with my paintings, that I can have that experience. And then there's some that I can look at and be like, who the fuck, how did that happen? Yeah, I don't remember. Is that me?
For the most part, they're like these little time tunnels that you go into.
Totally.
I love that and like I said, that's the power of being an artist. Like over the period of a lifetime, talking about being sentimental, you get to see you in so many different like stages of your life. And like you say, when I look back at drawings, even ones that I did when I was like a kid, I remember like, oh yeah, like I remember then other things like, oh, I was reading this book at that time, or this teacher had like red hair and was like a giant, and just these odd flashbacks that you wouldn't have ordinarily because you've had these things that can jog your memory.
Yeah, they're like strange. It's almost like olfactory memories.
Yeah,
It has a strange, and nothing else for me operates that way than my work.
Yeah. So what type of music do you listen to when you're making work?
I listen to an absurd amount of Brian Eno and ambient music. Brian Eno, John Hassel. That's a lot of music without lyrics.
Yeah.
I like what I think even Eno or Eric Satie called, architectural music, or Satie called it furniture music. And so it's really structural. It changes, it alters the physical space. And there's some Japanese artists whose names I butcher when I try to pronounce, but that are also influenced by the ambient movement from the 70s in the US. And some of them are incredible. And some of them actually incorporate sounds. Like they'll record their pieces outside so that some of the exterior sounds kind of infiltrate the recording. And those are really beautiful. And so, I like the music that kind of flows seamlessly in and out. And I think of my practice in that way too. It doesn't, like you were just saying, doing nothing is absolutely doing something. And so, outside of the studio is just as important part of the practice as inside the studio actually making. And to back to the other question about the hurdles, not beating yourself up when you just don't have the will.
Yeah.
That it's okay to just sort of stop and rest for a minute. And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
To make yourself just be still.
And I think, with society, especially that question of, well, what do you do if you have a creative block? And it's like, you should do nothing.
Right.
Do something else.
Do something entirely different. Yeah.
Brian Eno keeps popping up in my life. And so I need to meet him. He's in his 70s. He's working less right now. But yeah, so that's a whole other journey there.
It's just outstanding, his work. Yeah. I can, all that ambient stuff, and even the vocal ambient stuff, the vocal stuff, I enjoy that too. I'll listen to that, and but for the most part, it's those four ambient records that just get my goat.
So you paint, and then
Right.
there's this beautiful finished result. And, for some other people, perhaps the process is like the important stuff of like how you got there and like capturing, you put a lot of your physicality into the work. Have you ever like filmed yourself working or filmed like the paintbrush on the canvas over time or kind of anything like that from a process?
No, I've never done anything like that. Never done anything like that.
Because sometimes when you look at a painting as beautiful and as intricate and as detailed as yours, you have to think, how did you get there?
Right.
And then there's all this material from that like first time that you put that the brush on the canvas to the end, to the conception. And all that movement in between is art.
Right.
All that movement in between every brush stroke is art. And it's gone.
That's right.
And so for myself, I always love the idea of capturing that journey between like the beginning and the end of the painting. And sometimes I won't even show the end result because it's more about how I got there.
Right.
Have you ever thought about that? It doesn't sound like it.
Right.
But
I mean, it's interesting. I think about your work where the movement is the work in so many ways. Otherwise it's a point, to sort of reference Kandinsky. It's just a point until you move your body and then it's a line. I think, the physical aspect of making those paintings. Well, first of all, especially the big ones, they really are quite physical, and I work very fast in the beginning. So much so that I'm literally sweating after a day on that. So it's a lot of physicality. It would be interesting to see that some sort of time lapse of that.
And I think what would be interesting is if there is a camera on you, if that kind of the feeling of eyes being on you will make you act or perform differently.
That would be interesting.
Does that take some of that like freedom and like comfort that you have with the canvas away because now you feel like you're being watched or you're performing? It'll be interesting to test that.
It would be interesting. I have a suspicion about it because in a funny way, I feel like the making of the painting, I feel like there's something kind of ugly about it. I don't mean to put it that way. Maybe that's the right word. Sort of clumsy because it feels to me like a series of failures that suddenly, I think of the painting, and on any painting, there's a moment when I say like the lights come on, like I've been toiling away in the darkness of the picture, and then all of a sudden something comes on and I see its logic.
Yeah.
And then that once it develops a kind of a logic of its own, then I can follow that.
Yeah.
But until then, it's kind of frantic almost, the process.
I think the interesting thing about that is that you have to get very physical with your work to feel it in your body. And then at some point, like your body's gone through all those motions and then it clicks because you know that sense of space and a sense of time and a sense of distance because you feel it inside you.
I think that's a really interesting observation. Yeah. Yeah.
But I love that, it's a workout.
It's a workout,
and
man.
like good art makes you sweat,
It's a workout. It for sure is a workout.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so when, you're going to have this show, people are going to show up. What do you want people to take home with them? Kind of like
all the paintings.
Yes. Okay. yes, please. Okay.
I want them to take the paintings home. I don't know. I think I want people to like them.
Yeah.
I want them to. I think I want to just hold on to them for a second.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my work, I try to sort of seduce you, not for the purpose of seducing you, but to just like make you stop for a minute.
Yeah.
So, we tend to move quickly. I do it too. I go to these great institutions and blast past, Rubens paintings. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll languish on some of them, but, I think I want to just sort of grab you by the lapel for a minute and have you stand still and just look at it. Look what I did.
Yeah.
Look at this.
And when you're, kind of way in the future and you're looking back at what you did, like what do you want that legacy to be?
I think I hope to see, what I like to see when I look back at older works is I like to see I like to see the seedlings of what I'm doing now. I like to know that 20 years ago I was onto something.
Yeah.
You know, because I feel like in the moment for myself, I always feel like whatever I'm doing is absolutely wrong. So it would be nice to see. So when I am in a moment where it's kind of clicking, flowing, it's nice to look back at something I did 20 years ago and say, oh yeah, I see sort of an element of what I'm doing here there. I see the beginning, the early thinking there. So I guess I hope to look back and see that whatever was there the whole time was the right thing.
Yeah. And it will be. Or it might not be.
I hope I get to look back. I
Yeah.
hope, God willing, I get to live a long time and look back at
Yeah.
a body of work.
And so as a whole, what do you think is the point of art?
Fuck.
Exactly.
Fucked if I know. What's the point of art? I think the point of art is to kind of, boy, that's a tough one, Shantell.
Yeah, that's why we're here, you know?
Jeez. What's the point of it?
Or maybe another way to think of what the point is like, what do you feel when you're making art?
Wildly present. I think maybe, I mean, in the most rudimentary way, it's just to sort of announce our presence.
I love that.
Like here we've mixed up with the stuff of the earth in this moment in time, and here's some residue of that mix up.
It's almost like I'm here, I was here, and I was present.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that.
I love that too.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you, Shantell. This was great.
Cool. And I'm super excited for your show. What are the dates again?
It opens July 11th at Miles McHenry Gallery in New York, in Chelsea, and it goes through to around the end of August. I don't know the date exactly.
Okay. Well, I'll be in New York mid-July, so I'll be
Oh, fantastic.
able to pass
Well, it
through.
opens the 11th.
I'm in Miami on the 11th. I get there on the 12th.
Oh, okay. Well, it'll be up.
Okay, fantastic.
It'll
Well,
be up.
thank you so much. This
Thank
has been
you,
so
Shantell.
fun.
Really fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of What's the Point, recorded at Spotify Studios in Los Angeles. Check out our website made by Eat.studio. Grant Alexander Peters does our theme music, engineering, and editing. Research and pre-show preparation are done by Vern Molidor and Joyce Adams-So from the Shantell Martin studio team. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a nice 5-star review. Don't forget to check out the show description for more information on today's guest. And you can follow myself and the podcast on Instagram at Shantell_Martin. What's the point? Knowing more as we fly into outer space. Knowing more as we fly into outer space. Knowing more as we see more. Knowing more as we be more. Knowing more as we explore more. Knowing more as we are more. Knowing more as we see more. Knowing more as we draw more. Knowing more as we think more. Knowing more as we are more. Knowing more as we draw more. Knowing more as we read more. Knowing more as we form more. Knowing more as we walk more. Knowing more as we talk more. Knowing more as we see more. Knowing more as we think more. Knowing more as we talk more. Knowing more as we know more. Knowing more as we grow more. Knowing more as we read more. Knowing more as we eat more. Knowing more as we think more. Knowing more as we explore more. Knowing more as we drink more. Knowing more as we walk more. Knowing more as we read more. Knowing more as we think more. Knowing more as we be more. Knowing more as we make more. Knowing more as we shake more. Knowing more as we share more. knowing more as we sing more, knowing more as we sink more, knowing more as we drive more, knowing more as we be more, knowing more as we think more, knowing more as we are more, knowing more as we explore more, knowing more as we be more, knowing more as we are more, knowing more as we think more, knowing more as the wind blows, knowing more as the sink goes, knowing more as the time goes, knowing more as space goes, knowing more as we think more, knowing more as we blink more, knowing more as we take more, knowing more as we explore more, knowing more as we read more, knowing more as we play more, knowing more as we be more, knowing more as you are more, knowing more, knowing more, knowing more, knowing more.